A man stood on the bus, being scolded, being looked down upon for not giving up his seat. No one knew. He was the chairman of a trillion-dollar corporation, and the person who insulted him, tomorrow, was going to enter the interview room, sitting opposite the person he thought was useless. The seat on the bus, a story about kindness, about silence. And the seat not everyone is qualified to sit. Early morning city. Cold weather. Weak rays of sunlight penetrated through the leaves. Everything was still quiet. Hazy, as if not yet awake. James Miller stepped onto the number 15 bus from the Southmere Street stop. He wore a light gray shirt, an old wool coat over it. On his shoulder was a faded cloth bag. No one paid any attention to him. A middle-aged man, simple, somewhat silent. He sat down on an empty seat near the back of the bus. Quiet, not a sound. The bus gradually filled up. People got on and off. Sounds of soft chatter. The sound of doors opening and closing. The sound of hurried footsteps. James kept his eyes on the glass door. The dim light reflected his face. Calm. Not tired. Not in a hurry. As if he didn't need to go anywhere at the next stop. A middle-aged woman stepped on. She was wearing a cleaning uniform. Her face still had traces of sleep. No empty seats. She stood in the middle of the bus, her hands holding onto the bar hold. A man standing behind her spoke, annoyed, irritated, heavy. Young people these days are really sitting there looking at the elderly and not knowing how to give up their seats. The whole car fell silent. James was still looking out the window. The man stepped closer, his voice as loud as thunder. "Hey, I'm talking to you. You there? Are you pretending not to hear? Stand up and let people sit." A few passengers turned curious eyes. Some frowned in annoyance. Others were silent. No one intervened. James turned his head gently, nodded to the woman. Then he stood up. Invited her to sit in his seat. No words. No resistance, no apology. The man still didn't stop. Humiliating. You're old and still don't know what politeness is. James bowed his head, hands holding the cloth bag, standing against the side of the car, looking at the floor, not seeming offended, just silent. A young girl standing nearby whispered, "He just stood up for someone." But the man didn't listen, or didn't want to listen. He continued to mumble louder as he spoke. James didn't reply. He just closed his eyes, sighed softly. The wind outside the window blew through his dark brown hair. A sad look, not because of the words, but because of the way people treated each other on a peaceful morning. The bus continued to roll through the small streets. Inside the bus, the atmosphere was still tense. The man, Rick, was still standing there, arms folded, glancing at James like a winner. James stood near the door, still holding the cloth bag. No reaction, no anger, no hatred. A few people glanced at him, then turned away. No one knew who he was. No one thought he was the most powerful person in the city's largest technology corporation. A normal bus rider. A careless old man. According to Rick, Rick continued to ramble, talking about his son, that he had taught him to behave, to be smart in society, that if everyone was as careless as this old man, society would be in chaos. A few people pursed their lips. A few eyes began to look at Rick with a different look, but no one dared to speak, because of that loud voice. Because of that aggressive look, James occasionally bowed slightly to someone passing by. His face was calm. Nothing fake. Just acceptance. An old man in the row above turned to look at James, nodded slightly, said nothing, but his eyes seemed to say, "I know. I understand." The car stopped at the next stop. Rick cleared his throat, then stepped out of the car. Before leaving, he turned back and threw a sentence, "Next time, remember to be more polite, sir." The car door closed. Dry sound silence returned. James was still standing there, not looking back. Only his eyes narrowed slightly because the morning sunlight was shining directly on the glass. A minute later, the voice of the woman from earlier was heard. She gently stood up, walked closer to James, said softly, "Thank you, I'm fine. Don't be sad." James smiled, shook his head. He replied, "It's fine, thank you for telling me that." The car continues, through the intersections, through the honking, through the trees. James still stands there, silent as if he doesn't belong here anymore, but he doesn't leave either. The car continues, as if nothing has happened, but to James, what he just saw is a piece of the truth of society hidden in the plastic chair that morning. The bus stopped for 3 more stops. People got on, people got off. No one mentioned what happened earlier, but the atmosphere still felt like something had not yet dissipated. James was still standing there, leaning lightly against the side of the bus, his hand still tightly holding the strap of his cloth bag. His eyes were calm, quiet like a night watchman, still observing, still feeling. A young girl walked up. She was the one who spoke for him earlier, about 25 years old, white shirt, glasses, long hair tied up. She smiled slightly, then said enough for him to hear, "I found what just happened unpleasant, but the way you kept quiet made me respect you." James turned around. His gaze softened, no defense, no unnecessary reaction. "Thank you, but I didn't do anything special." The girl shook her head. "You don't need to do anything. Just not getting angry is already different." James chuckled lightly, a quiet smile, as if no one had ever complimented him for not being angry. The girl continued to ask, "What do you do?" "You look like a retired teacher." James thought for a second. Then he replied, "I used to teach some people how to behave." The sentence made the girl pause, not understanding the full meaning, but her eyes suddenly had something more respectful. The space around them softened. Outside the glass door, the sun began to shine brighter. The city moved in a familiar shell, but inside, people's hearts changed little by little. The girl took a small book from her pocket. "Give it to James. I'm reading this. It's called Kindness Without Conditions. You'll like it." James took it, turns the cover lightly. "I've read it before, but it's been so long since anyone mentioned it." The girl smiled. "My name is Ellie. I hope to see you again." The car stopped. She got off without looking back, but in James's eyes there was a silent dot, like a dot in the middle of a morning song. The car continued. The new person got on. The old story was left behind, but in James's heart nothing really passed. It was just that he chose not to bring it. The car stopped at a station near the center. James got off. No one noticed. No one greeted. No one thanked, like an invisible person. He crossed the street, walked towards a building without a sign. A normal entrance. An old elevator. But behind the door on the 14th floor was the executive office of an international corporation. James passed the reception desk. The staff bowed to him. He nodded slightly. No polite smile. Only silence. Secretary Clara was waiting in front of the room. She was the one who understood him best, not only in work but the way you live. "President, you seem tired." James shook his head. "It's just a morning. Lots of unnecessary noise." Clara followed. I've already scheduled a meeting, but there's something interesting. There's a new candidate, nominated for the position of business manager. James put his bag on the table, poured himself a glass of water. I thought that position was still open. Clara nodded. That's right. But yesterday, the board recommended it. They said he had experience. He was a team leader at a partner company. James took a sip of water, eyes looking out the window. The city below him, buses still stretched between the streets. Clara opened the file, put it on the table. His name is Rick Hansen. James paused. The hand holding the glass of water tightened slightly. It was unclear whether it was from surprise or from remembering. Clara looked at him. Is there a problem? James shook his head. His eyes calmed down. It's okay. Let him in. I'll be the interviewer. Clara nodded. Quietly walked out, leaving James alone in the bright room. He stood up, walked to the window. Outside, the sun was high. The sunlight shone through the glass illustrations on his light gray shirt. In those eyes, it was no longer silence, but a sign that the lesson was about to begin. The bus stopped for 3 more stops. People got on. People got off. No one mentioned what happened earlier, but the atmosphere still felt like something had not yet dissipated. James was still standing there, leaning lightly against the side of the bus, his hand still tightly holding the strap of his cloth bag. His eyes were calm, quiet, like a night watchman, still observing, still feeling. A young girl walked up. She was the one who spoke for him earlier, about 25 years old, white shirt, glasses, long hair tied up. She smiled slightly, then said enough for him to hear. I found what just happened unpleasant, but the way you kept quiet made me respect you. James turned around. His gaze softened, no defense, no unnecessary reaction. Thank you, but I didn't do anything special. The girl shook her head. You don't need to do anything. Just not getting angry is already different. James chuckled lightly, a quiet smile, as if no one had ever complimented him for not being angry. The girl continued to ask, What do? You look like a retired teacher. James thought for a second. Then he replied, I used to teach some people how to behave. The sentence made the girl pause, not understanding the full meaning, but her eyes suddenly had something more respectful. The space around them softened. Outside the glass door, the sun began to shine brighter. The city moved in a familiar shell. But inside, people's hearts changed little by little. The girl took a small book from her pocket. Give it to James. I'm reading this. It's called Kindness Without Conditions. You'll like it. James took it, turns the cover lightly. I've read it before, but it's been so long since anyone mentioned it. The girl smiled. My name is Ellie. I hope to see you again. The car stopped. She got off without looking back, but in James's eyes there was a silent dot, like a dot in the middle of a morning song. The car continued. The new person got on. The old story was left behind. But in James's heart, nothing really passed. It was just that he chose not to bring it. The car stopped at a station near the center. James got off. No one noticed. No one greeted. No one thanked. Like an invisible person. He crossed the street, walked towards a building without a sign. A normal entrance. An old elevator, but behind the door on the 14th floor was the executive office of an international corporation. James passed the reception desk. The staff bowed to him. He nodded slightly. No polite smile, only silence. Secretary Clara was waiting in front of the room. She was the one who understood him best, not only in work, but the way you live. "President, you seem tired." James shook his head. "It's just a morning. Lots of unnecessary noise." Clara followed. "I've already scheduled a meeting, but there's something interesting. There's a new candidate, nominated for the position of business manager." James put his bag on the table, poured himself a glass of water. "I thought that position was still open." Clara nodded. "That's right, but yesterday, the board recommended it. They said he had experience. He was a team leader at a partner company." James took a sip of water, eyes looking out the window. The city below him. Buses still stretched between the streets. Clara opened the file, put it on the table. "His name is Rick Hansen." James paused. The hand holding the glass of water tightened slightly. It was unclear whether it was from surprise or from remembering. Clara looked at him. "Is there a problem?" James shook his head. His eyes calmed down. "It's okay. Let him in. I'll be the interviewer." Clara nodded, quietly walked out, leaving James alone in the bright room. He stood up, walked to the window. Outside, the sun was high. The sunlight shone through the glass illustrations on his light gray shirt. In those eyes, it was no longer silence, but a sign that the lesson was about to begin. The next morning, the sky was clear. The cool air blew through the third-floor window of a small apartment in the middle of the city. Rick Hansen stood in front of the mirror. He was wearing a new dark blue suit. His navy tie was tied meticulously. His black shoes were polished. His expensive perfume was lightly scented. His face was confident. His hands were on his hips. His eyes were raised. His gaze was focused on himself. "Today is my day," Rick said softly. His voice sounded like he was acting out a short film he had written himself. He walked into the kitchen. He quickly drank a cup of coffee, then picked up the file he had tucked in his black leather bag. When he got to the door, Rick received a call. On the other end of the line was Jack, his old best friend. "Are you leaving yet?" "It's our Victory Corporation. They're famous all over town." Rick smiled and replied briefly, "I didn't come here to ask for a job. I came here to receive authority." He hung up, took a taxi, didn't take the bus, didn't want people to think he was small. He always believed classy people must be different. The taxi stopped in front of a tall glass building. The sunlight reflected on the facade of our Victory headquarters. Rick stepped out. His posture was straight. His chin was high. His suit jacket was flat. He held a briefcase in his hand as if he were entering his own territory. A security guard was busy talking on the walkie-talkie. Rick didn't wait. He didn't nod. He didn't smile. He just said, briefly, coldly, "What kind of work is this?" Then he pushed the glass door open and walked in. He didn't notice the unpleasant eyes behind him. He didn't see anyone glancing at him either. He thought, they should look. "Don't I look like a future leader?" Clara, the president's secretary, was waiting at the reception desk. She was wearing a cream shirt. Her hair was tied up. Her face was calm. "Are you Rick Hansen?" "Yes. I'm here for an interview." "I'm Clara. Please follow me." They entered the elevator. Rick looked around. The glass wall reflected his silhouette next to the elegant woman. He felt right. He felt right, like he was already a part of this place. When the elevator door opened on the 14th floor, Clara invited him down the hallway. "The interview room is at the end of the hall. The president is waiting for you." Rick nodded, adjusted his collar, buttoned his cuffs. His heart beat steadily. His heart was full of expectation. He reached out and grabbed the doorknob, pushed it gently, entered, and then The sight before him made him stop. His feet were rooted to the floor. Sitting in the middle of the room, in the large chair across from him. No one else. It was the man he had insulted on the bus yesterday, James Miller, the president of our Victory Corporation, the man who could decide his entire future with just one sentence. James was looking at him, not smiling, not surprised, not even reproachful, just a look, calm, but as deep as a dry well. Rick stood still. His hand tightened on the strap of his bag. The documents in his briefcase seemed to weigh a few more pounds. The whole room became suffocatingly quiet. James spoke. His voice was deep and clear. "Please sit." Rick sat down. Slowly, carefully, the leather chair beneath him made a faint creaking sound. But in the silence, it sounded like the sigh of someone who realized he was in the wrong place. He bowed his head. His hands rested on his knees. His palms were slightly damp. The air seemed to condense around his collar. It was hard to breathe, but he couldn't cough. He couldn't say a word. James Miller sat there, straight back, silent. No file opened, no writing, no words. Just looked at Rick. A calm gaze, but deep as a lake without wind. Rick cleared his throat, trying to regain some of his composure. "I thank you, Chairman, for giving me this opportunity today." James didn't respond immediately. He just tilted his head slightly, as if waiting to see what he would say next. Rick tried to continue. "My name is Rick Hansen. I was a sales leader at Grandin Tech. I have experience launching new markets, leading teams, and growing revenue in consecutive quarters." He spoke quickly, like he had memorized it, like he had something in his hand. But each word echoed like it was bouncing off a cliff. No response, no nods, no notes. James just looked straight. No expression changed, no frowns, no nods either. Rick slowed down. The next sentence was not as steady as the first. "I believe I am suited for the position of department head, not only because of my skills, but also because of my ability to adapt and lead people." For the first time, James spoke. His voice was not high, not fast, but each word seemed heavier than usual. "What do you think makes a good leader?" Rick sat up straight. "The ability to coordinate a team, make timely decisions, take control of a situation, have foresight." James was silent for a few seconds. Then he asked again, "What about patience, listening ability, self-control?" Rick blinked. "Of course, that's important too." James nodded slightly. Only then did he open the file, flipping through the pages. But his eyes still did not leave Rick. If there was someone in the group who dressed normally, didn't talk much, didn't stand out, would you look down on them? Rick paused for a moment. "No, I shouldn't." James didn't raise his head, but the next sentence seemed to penetrate the wall. "So, what if that person was yelled at, insulted, in public, just because they didn't give up their seat to someone else?" The question seemed to fall on the room. The air was still. Rick did not answer immediately. His hands clasped together. His eyes lowered. "I was wrong." His voice was small. He had never been so small in front of anyone. James closed the file, put the pen down on the table. Softly, very softly. But the sound was like a full stop. "Do you know why I didn't say anything on the bus yesterday?" Rick looked up. For the first time, he looked straight into the other person's eyes. "Because you didn't want to make a big deal out of it." James shook his head. "Because I wanted to see. how you treat people without power. That sentence almost made Rick collapse, not because he was caught, but because he was seen clearly, clear to the core of his ego. James continued, "I don't care how many people you've led. It doesn't matter how much money you've made. Here, we want people who know how to step back when necessary." Rick bowed his head, no longer resisting. He said nothing, just sat there, letting what he had just heard sink in. James stood up, walked toward the door. Before opening it, he paused, didn't turn around, just left one sentence. "The chair you're sitting in, not everyone can keep, but anyone can start over, if they want to." The door opened. James walked out. Rick sat back down, silence. There was no longer fear in his heart, but the feeling of losing something. And for the first time, he understood why he had never really grown up. Rick was still sitting there, in the chair that an hour ago he had thought he would be sitting in as a victor. Now it was the seat of someone learning his first lesson in arrogance. The room was quiet. The air conditioner hummed softly. The light from the window slanted across the desk, shining on his file, still open. Rick glanced around. For the first time, he really looked. Not to judge, not to be proud, but to understand where he was. The abstract painting hung to his left. The clock on the wall read 10:15. A notebook from the interviewer. A glass of water still half full. Everything was so ordinary. But it was that ordinariness that made him feel out of place. The door opened slightly. Clara walked in. She didn't speak right away. She just looked at Rick. A calm gaze, no judgment, no pity. She placed a white envelope on the table. "The president left this for you." Rick picked it up. His hands trembled slightly, gently opened it. Inside was a thin piece of paper, not a rejection letter, nor a harsh judgment, but a proposal for a trial period, not a department head, not a deputy department head, but community development collaborator, a small position, a title that no one noticed, no sitting in leadership meetings, no separate chair, but a place to touch real people, real work. No gloss, no illusions. Rick was silent. His eyes stopped at the bottom line of the paper, a line of neat, handwritten words. Second chance, only for those who dare to change. He stared at the words for a long time, longer than he had spent reading the old Grandin Tech contract, longer than he had practiced his introduction in front of the mirror. Clara stood there. She waited. No rush, no pressure, as if the rest was up to him. Rick raised his head, asked softly, "Why didn't he fire me right away?" Clara tilted her head, then answered, "Because you haven't left this room yet." Rick was silent. The answer made his throat tighten, not because he was blamed, but because he was forgiven. Forgiven in a way that didn't need to be said. He stood up, slowly, carefully, bowed slightly toward Clara. "I want to try again." Clara nodded. No big smile, just a barely audible nod. But in her eyes, respect was kindled. Rick took the paper, walked out of the room. The door closed behind him. The big chair in the middle of the room was still there, empty, but this time it was no longer for a good talker. It was waiting for someone who could truly change. Rick walked out of the interview room. The hallway was still empty. The recessed lights were still shining evenly, not glaring, not dark, but his footsteps today were no longer as heavy as when he arrived. They were slower and lighter, as if He didn't want to disturb. Rick went down the elevator, didn't talk to anyone, didn't stop at the receptionist. He quietly walked out into the building's main lobby. The glass doors closed behind him. The whole world outside was still bustling. Only he had changed. He sat down on a nearby stone bench. The afternoon wind blew through his shoulders. The strong scent of perfume was gone. Only the scent of time remained, and the scent of truth. Rick pulled the paper out of his pocket. He looked again at the title, Community Development Associate. He laughed, a smile that he didn't even recognize. Not a smirk, not a proud smile, just a smile because, finally, maybe, he was in the right place. The following week, Rick was in a small office located on the ground floor of another building, not far from the main office. There were no polished wooden floors, no large conference tables, just thick files, volunteer rosters, and phone calls from the residential area on the east side of the city. Rick did his first thing. Listened to a 74-year-old woman calling to ask for help repainting her gate because her hands were shaking so much. He didn't know what to say at first. Just listened and asked, "What color do you like?" The question seemed simple, but on the other end of the line, the old woman was silent for a moment. Then she laughed. "It's been a long time since someone asked me that." After noon, Rick took a survey to the old neighborhood. Met a group of young people. At first, they didn't pay attention to him. They just saw him as a man in a plain shirt, holding a paper board, knocking on doors. But at the end of the day, a boy turned around and asked, "Are you the one who interviewed my boss?" Rick was surprised. The boy pointed to the logo on the paper he was holding. "I'm studying at T, interning at our Victory. Yesterday we saw an uncle being scolded on the bus. It seemed to be our president." Rick paused. His heart seemed to stop for a beat. He looked at the boy. His eyes were clear, without prejudice. He smiled lightly. "Yeah, maybe it was you." He didn't react. He just stood up and gave up his seat, I think. He was the oldest person I've ever seen. Rick bowed his head. His eyes seemed to touch the truth once more. Not from James, not from the file, but from a child who had never known how to pretend. That night, Rick went home. He took off his tie, put the suit in the closet, looked at himself in the mirror. No longer the one who spoke first. No longer the one who was so confident that he forgot to be humble. Just a man who bowed his head and started again with the little things. A Monday morning, the sun was slanting down the street. Rick was wearing a simple shirt, carrying a new plan. He was waiting at the bus stop. He didn't call a taxi. He didn't look for a private vehicle. He just stood there, like everyone else. The number 15 bus arrived. The door opened. He got on. No one looked at him like a stranger. No more contemptuous eyes followed him. The bus was still full. There were still many people. There were also old people. There were pregnant women. There were even students with backpacks, dozing off. Rick leaned against the handle in the middle of the bus, and for the first time, he didn't look for a seat. A man in simple clothes got on from the next stop. He looked a little familiar. His back was slightly hunched. His hair was streaked with gray, a light gray shirt. Rick looked up. His heart ached slightly. It was James, his president, and the one who had silently endured his own temper. James stood near the door, still holding the faded cloth bag. Still calm, still silent like a normal person. Rick said nothing, nor did he walk over immediately. He just silently observed and remembered the day he yelled at this person, cursed unreasonably. The day a respectable person, just stood still and smiled. An elderly woman stepped forward. Rick walked over, invited her to sit, without waiting for anyone to remind him, without waiting for anyone to praise him. James turned around. Their eyes met. There was no blame, no big smile, just a calm look. Rick nodded slightly. James nodded slightly too. No need to say anything. It was enough to know that they understood each other. When the bus reached the next stop, Rick got off first. James stayed behind. No one recognized the man as the chairman. No one knew, and didn't need to know. Rick walked back to his office, holding the plan he had written all night. The plan to renovate the old playground in the East District, not for the sake of achievements, not for the sake of extra points, just for the sake of the children who didn't have a place to play like before. Clara greeted him in the hallway. She asked, "Did you take the bus here?" Rick nodded. I understand why he still chooses to go every day." Clara smiled. For the first time, a real smile. Not out of formality, not out of politeness, but because she knew Rick had really changed. The internal meeting took place that afternoon. James sat at the back of the table. No chairman, no high-profile position, just listened. Rick was the presenter, not as good as before, no flowery language, but every sentence was genuine, all about people, about community, about kindness. When it was over, everyone applauded. James didn't clap, just nodded, and wrote a brief note in his notebook. He understands the chair. A week later, Rick was assigned to support an internal event of the Our Victory group. Not as a guest, not as a speaker. He just stood backstage, overseeing the preparation of water, seats, and documents, a quiet position. But Rick did not feel degraded. On the contrary, he felt light and calm. The ceremony was held in a large hall. The decoration was simple. The sound was soft, no flashing lights, no eloquent background music like he used to like. The senior leaders took turns speaking, talking about strategy, about personnel, about the future. Rick stood backstage, watching everything, quietly, attentively, not missing a single detail. The most important moment of the ceremony was the honoring of some individuals who contributed to the community development program. The MC read the list slowly. Rick was not on the list. He smiled, because he knew he did not need to be mentioned. He had not done enough, and most of all, he was not here to be honored. When everyone turned their attention to the stage, Rick turned back, collected the name tags that had fallen, arranged the documents left on the tables and chairs. He bent down to pick up a pen that had fallen near the podium. When he looked up, James Miller was standing on the other side of the stage. His eyes were not on the audience. They were looking at Rick. They did not speak, no hand-waving, no signal needed. Just a slight nod. In that look was recognition, was respect. No applause, no titles. The ceremony was over. Everyone left. Rick stayed behind to clean up last. He carefully turned off the lights in each area. When he reached the front row, he saw a small piece of paper placed neatly on the chairman's chair. The handwriting was familiar. Neat, sure, unsigned. The chair does not make the man. It is the man who behaves that creates the value of the chair. Rick took the paper, folded it, put it in his pocket, said nothing, just walked with a lighter body and a firmer step. He did not need a high platform to stand on, just a place to do the right thing and a chance to make things right. Not in front of a crowd, but in front of his own conscience. Outside, the sun was mild. Rick left the building, walked to the bus stop. The 15 bus arrived again. The door opened. He got on. Find a place near the window. He looked out at the street. The city was still noisy. People were still in a hurry. The seats were still full. But he understood. There are chairs you don't need to sit on to feel grown up. And there are changes. No need to declare, just start.